Hi, Julie Jones from SSB Performance, Smarter, Stronger, Better Mindset Training, here with this week's Mindset Made Simple Tip of the Week, brought to you by Game Day Sportswear. ShopGameDay.net for everything you need for all sporting gear, any kind of engravables, you name it, they make it. I just picked up some new gear from Gina Bennett, the owner, yesterday, and she's always so good to me and makes great looking stuff. So if you need any kind of equipment, ShopGameDay.net. Today, our tip is talking about what the 12U Rec League, remember, baseball championship taught me about pressure. Well, the bracket played out exactly how it was supposed to. Number one played number two. Number one was not us. We were number two. And it played out all the way through, all the way into the championship. And if I were the typical sport parent, which I refuse to be, I could tell you a million reasons why we weren't number one. But we were number two. And we're okay with that. It was a great season. All the players and even all the parents, from the number one hitter to the very last hitter, everyone walked away from this championship game feeling good about the season and about their growth and about themselves. And if that is a success in today's crazy sport culture, I don't know what is. But as we prepared to face our formidable foe, the undefeated Revere Red team, we started to think. And then we started to think about what they did. And then we started to focus on what they've done. And then we started to talk about the fact that they haven't walked anybody, or they walked 5 people in the last 4 games, or this or that or the other. And all of a sudden, we started to talk about the pressure of playing in a championship. But we didn't talk about it. We started to feel it. And the pressure of playing this team who was markedly better than everybody in the league. And I could go into a million reasons why, but I won't, because it doesn't matter. But the bottom line is we started to think about changing our approach. Why? Because now all of a sudden we're in a championship. And that game is different than all the others. And we know that that game is different, but it's not. And we get ourselves into trouble when we start to think about what the other people do compared to focusing on what it is that we can do. I learned a couple good things throughout this season. Number one, and I knew this through my entire coaching career, is that base running matters. It matters. And we won games because we were really good at base running. And we were scoring from second on ground balls to the infield because we just trusted it. Until the end, sort of. And then I also learned that it is really important that we stick to what we do. That's harder. That's harder. That affects whether or not we're going to use this awesome tactic of putting pressure on people through base running. We have to stick to what we do. And if we don't, it's a recipe for disaster. We didn't have a disastrous finish. We didn't win the championship. But we did alter a few things we did, and I think that changed a few things. It may not have changed the outcome, but it definitely changed our process. And when we get into championship games, we start to think about outcome instead of staying focused on our process, because pressure makes us think, feel, and act differently. And we know when we think, feel, and act differently, we perform differently, and then we get different results. We know this. And yet we feel this tug to change because now we've got to step it up, as if what we did to get there wasn't going to be enough. And what does that do to our mindset is the question. Sian Bellick, and she is an author, and she's also the president of one of the best institutions in the country. She wrote Choke, What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to. She says that our ability to perform hinges on staying within our comfort zone. And I quote, when we get too caught up in the moment and start second guessing our well-practiced routines, that is when we choke. But what do when we get into pressure situations? We start to question what we're doing, and we start to put our focus over there. Their catcher's got a good arm. We've got to be careful of that. Their pitcher doesn't have a step back to allow us to, in his move, to allow us to get a big jump and steal second. Or do we really want to run because they're going to be able to make those plays? Should we put the number 2 down because they don't walk anybody and move the number 6 up? And those are recipes for disaster. Those are recipes for choking. Why? Because it gets us out of our comfort zone. If you move the 2 to the 6 and the 6 to the 2 for one game at the end of the season, they're both uncomfortable. And what happens when we get uncomfortable? We start to think. And what happens when we start to think? Overthinking is a trap. We think that it's giving us control, but ultimately it's taking our focus away from what we need to do to what we think we should do, which brings in all kinds of distracting things, and we get hijacked. And that's not where we want to be. In The Inner Game of Tennis, author Tim Gallwey, I'm sure that you have all read The Inner Game of Tennis. What a great book. He talks about how detrimental overthinking can be. He talks about self one and self two. He's got this self one, self two concept. Self one is the conscious mind, right? And it often interferes with self two, which is the subconscious mind. And I talk about the right brain and the left brain. This is our ruminating brain. This is our trust brain. It's the same kind of thing. But when we start to think too much, or when we start to change or put in new changes before we have a chance to really implement them in practice, then the self one gets in the way of self two. And we really want to be focused on self two. We want self two to go. That automatic response, this is what we do when we play baseball or when we kick or when we swim or when we putt. That's what we want in charge because our body knows what to do. It's our brain that gets in the way. And we know this. We know this. But it's still hard to do. It really comes down to trust, right? Can we trust our body to do what it's trained to do? Can we trust our tactics to prove formidable or worthy of the formidable foe? That's what it comes down to. Dr. Michael Gervais, we've talked about him before. He wrote The First Rule of Mastery: stop worrying about what other people think of you. He supports the idea that we've got to do what we do, and you can tell by the title of his book. But he emphasizes the importance of trusting. He says when you deviate from your usual approach because of pressure, you're essentially saying you don't trust your own preparation. It's just like us building routines. We try to build routines to manage uncertainty so that we feel more comfortable. And then we've got all these routines, and we're doing all this to make ourselves comfortable. And then when pressure comes and a big game comes, we change things, which takes us right out of our comfort zone. It takes us out of trusting to say, you know what, maybe I wasn't that good, or maybe we're not that good, because now we have to change things because of what they might do. I had a conversation with one of the coaches, and we were talking about moving the batting order around. I said, they walked 5 people in these 2 games, but that team's not us. Just like we used to look at our scouting reports and say they can't hit the changeup. Well, they don't have our changeup. And do we really know they can't hit the changeup? Or they do hit the changeup, or whatever the situation is. We are going to change before we know for sure that this doesn't work. It's got us here. Consistency is key in high pressure situation. Consistency leads to comfort. Comfort leads to confidence. We've got to have that string of words, those C words, in order so that we can perform at our best. In another book that we've talked about before too, The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg talks about how habits and routines shape our behavior and our performance. He says, when you're in a high stakes situation, the best thing you can do is rely on your habits. Do what you do. He goes on to say, a little paraphrasing in there in the middle, obviously, they are our brain's way of automating responses, allowing you to perform at your best without overthinking. In other words, it's the quote that I use all the time. We don't rise to occasion. We fall back on habits. And if our habits are good, we're in business. And if our habits aren't established, we're probably going to go back to what we did before, but only halfway because we're second guessing it. Now we've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and that never works. 1 foot in and 1 foot out is not a steady foundation. You know it. But if you're second guessing whether your habits are good enough, then you're not focused on doing what your habit was fully. You're not committed to it. And anytime we hesitate, you know what happens. It's like assuming. You know what happens then too. We'll go on to another great researcher, Marty Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania, talks about focusing too much on external factors. It throws us into overdrive. It throws us into a hyper alert state where we're like, whoa, this is too much. And it takes us out of our game and makes us feel overwhelmed. He says that when we shift our focus from uncontrollable outcomes to controllable processes, we are likely to perform at our best. When we shift away from uncontrollable outcomes, we don't control outcomes, and we shift to controllable processes, we are more likely to perform. It boils down to what we do and our responsibility to everything else. Yes, we have to scout. Yes, we have to adjust. But adjusting comes as we go. It doesn't have to, it's not a precursor to our action necessarily. Now, there might be something that we need to do, and I'm not saying that we don't ever adjust, because we've got to change to get better. There's no doubt about it. But you know what I mean. You know what that pull is to say, we've got to do more. We've got to practice more before the game. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. And we change our routine, and it freaks everybody out, including ourselves. Pressure shifts our focus to outcome. Process keeps us focused on what we can do. And then we're better suited to adjust to the game. I remind the people that I work with all the time that we are always playing against the game. Once a pitcher lets a ball go, no matter if they throw it this way or this way, the ball is out of their hand. It has nothing to do with that pitcher anymore. It's you, the hitter, and the ball, or you, even the catcher, and the ball. We're playing the game. And if we can keep ourselves focused on playing the game and adjust to it, whatever it throws at us, based on the skill and the practice that we've put in prior to this, then we're going to be okay, because we've taken the emotion out of it against our opponent, this big opponent that we tell ourselves stories about, compared to the game. It's a ball. And we either hit it, as I say, we decide, we identify, decide, and act. Identify, decide, and act. It's that simple. It's not about the guy who threw it or the girl who threw it. It's about it coming toward me and me deciding what I'm going to do. It's my responsibility that is going to decide whether or not the outcome is fair or foul, whatever it is. Somebody else decides that once it leaves my bat. That's all there is to it. We have to stick to what we know works. Like Michael Phelps says, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. And his coach, Bob Bowman, talked about trusting their training to its fullest. Period. They trained, he used that training to perform. There was no difference between the pool that he trained in and the other pools except the environment. But when he's swimming, it's all the same. So long as we stick to what we know works. I realize we're not Michael Phelps, but for those of us mere mortals, it's even more important to stick to our training, one step at a time. So the next time we play in a championship in the 13 or 14U next year, when we move up, right, we're going to be sticking to these principles, and we all should, because the pool of pressure is real. When pressure peaks, we're going to stick to our tried and true routines. We're going to control controllables. What can we control? How are we going to respond to the things around us? Because how we respond influences what happens next. Confidence comes from staying in our realm of control. We're going to remember how we feel now and plan ahead. We're going to build evidence journals. And then we're going to remind ourselves of what we do well and why things work so that we can stick to those things. But some of this comes before the championship. It's not about changing then. It's not about doing imagery and visualization and mental rehearsal right before then if we've never used it before. It's about reminding ourselves of what got us here and give ourselves a little plug to say, we're good. The game will play out as it's supposed to, so long as we stick to the plan, adjust where needed, observe the landscape, and give full effort. It is what it is after that. It helps us focus on what we can do instead of what they might do. Because no matter what, if we're focused too much on what the opponent is doing, then we are not focused on what we are doing. And when our attention is split, we are not as productive. We are not able to multitask. We can't think of two things at once. As Joe Parent writes in Zen Golf, when it comes to make a swing on the course, the best thing we can do is trust our body and instinctive mind to produce what we've practiced without thought about swinging mechanics, without trying to consciously direct our physical movements, because we know what to do. We've done it before, and pressure takes us away from those simple things that keep us on track. Finally, and I've said this a bunch of times in a little different way, but Oprah, years ago, I was on bed rest before I had my son, and I was watching Oprah. It was during the season. I was trying to preoccupy myself so I wasn't thinking about what was going on at practice. But Oprah said she never looked at her competition, and this is Oprah's quote. When you run a race, you hurt your ability to compete when you turn your head and look at the competition chasing you. You lose a step physically and psychologically. Run the race, always stretching to do your best. Imitations will come in last. No one can catch an original. That's a good one. It's by trusting our training. It's by sticking to routines. It's focusing on controllable factors that can help us navigate high stakes examples or experiences. And 12U rec baseball is not high stakes, but man, anything that we want to excel at, anything we want to win, gets us started thinking about things that are out of our control. When we come back into our locus of control, we're in a much better place to be our best. Remember, excellence isn't achieved by constant changing. Excellence is achieved by consistently executing what works. Time and time and time again. Think Cal Ripken. Think guys like that just practice consistency champions. I'd love to hear your thoughts about managing pressure in the situations that you've been in and what you've learned. Shoot me an email, put something in the comments if you're reading this at ssbperformance.com. Let's have a conversation about how we can be better at managing pressure, not just for those we lead, but for us as well. Until next week, have a great week. Baseball's over, so we're on to another topic next week. We'll see you next time.